Unknown Cuba. Cuba, one of the most amazing and mysterious of islands, and not just in the Caribbean, in the world. Fantastically beautiful resorts, one of the most stable political systems in the world. Cuba is an ethnographic and cultural Babylon, the home of a very beautiful and joyous people. But Cuba also has its secrets. Secrets that very few people know about. And these secrets have nothing to do with politics. Cuba is Fidel, who in his 70s still loves scuba diving but has given up his favorite cigars. Castro, the legendary revolutionary who for almost 40 years now has been the object of the hatred of some and the adoration of others. A man who can deliver an exhilarating many-hour-long speech without the benefit of notes, at a many thousand-strong gathering or at international forums. A politician whose old enemies continue to mercilessly hound him and whose friends have shamelessly turned their backs on him. All this causes Fidel to pay close attention to the changes taking place around him, changes he must keep up with. Today, his favorite statement is the following: Cuba is not trying to change the world, it is trying to change together with a changing world. Perhaps this is the reason behind Castro's, who is a Catholic school graduate, desire to meet the Pope, who in turn accepts Fidel's invitation to visit Cuba. Cuban revolutionaries regarded the church with suspicion, but with much more loyalty than their former friends and comrades from overseas. Today, many comrades proudly quote Núñez Jiménez, who said, "Not a single priest was imprisoned, not one church on Cuba was ever shut down." Yet, Fidel is not rushing to forsake the ideals of the past. The 7th of November remains a national holiday, and Cuban soldiers lay wreaths at the graves of Russian soldiers to commemorate the anniversary of the Russian Socialist Revolution. Recently, even devout Catholics were allowed to join the Communist Party, so now it isn't mandatory for Cuban communists to be atheists. This is why Jiménez, Fidel's close personal friend, with obvious satisfaction states that on Cuba, everything, finally, is becoming normal. Some things become normal, others remain normal. Some things appear for the first time like these Cubans, proponents, admirers of Harley-Davidson motorcycles, one of the legendary symbols of America, a country so close yet so distant. Members of this club manage to keep their exotic machines, most of which are over 50 years old, in excellent condition. And when they have enough money for gasoline, Havana's Harley aficionados can be seen dashing up and down the streets of Havana. Past portraits of Che Guevara and anti-imperialist slogans. At breakneck speed, maneuvering among numerous bicycles, one can see ancient American limousines and slightly newer Soviet automobiles of practically the same bygone era. Driving past luxurious mansions that used to belong to someone else, and past churches where today's Cubans go to worship. The 17th of December is one of the major Catholic holidays on socialist Cuba. People from all over the island, dressed in their simplest clothes, get down on their knees, then lay down on the ground in front of their homes, and in this way begin their difficult, some say masochistic, pilgrimage. It may continue for several weeks. For some worshippers, it takes several weeks to reach their goal, the St. Lazarus Church near Havana. Nowadays, on Cuba, only those who have devoted their lives to serving St. Lazarus are allowed to beg for charitable donations, or rather they are not prosecuted for begging. Many Cubans believe that St. Lazarus, who died in poverty begging from the rich, and who was resurrected according to the Bible as Jesus Christ, will help heal them and absolve them and their relatives of their sins. Perhaps this is why Fidel is quite certain that the visit of the Pope to Cuba will be a success. There was a time when the Vatican prohibited the celebration of St. Lazarus Day and took him out of the pantheon of Catholic saints. However, Cubans chose not to acknowledge this directive and continue to honor this saint, the patron of the poor and unfortunate, above others. Faith in biblical saints is not the only faith on Cuba. Many Cubans who pray to Saint Lazarus are quite knowledgeable in the mystical symbolism of ancient cults, dating back to the first slaves that were brought here from Africa over 500 years ago. The artist Salvador Gonzalez gets his inspiration from these cults. Pagan motifs from the lives of African gods are the basis of his art. For several years now, he has been painting the street he lives on. Each of these fantastically vivid works has a deep religious meaning which non-believers do not even suspect. In reality, the artist is creating an outdoor temple of African culture a stone's throw away from Havana's historical center. This project is financed by the artist himself, for he is not a poor man. His works are sought after in many countries, including European countries and the United States. His street, like a magnet, draws people whose appearance is quite exotic to the European eye. Here you can meet medicine men, warlocks practicing black magic, individuals who predict the future. Salvador considers it his mission in life to popularize African culture on Cuba. He wants Cubans to not only remember the sources of their culture, but to also understand the meaning behind the beliefs of their ancient African ancestors. There are rumors that Salvador is a warlock himself and that he possesses religious secrets that are, in their essence, akin to voodoo. In his own words, "I am an interpreter of some themes from African cultures," he says, "that have found a home here on Cuba. I consider myself a person who popularizes the ideas of a popular culture." In reality, Cubans express a natural interest in the past of their country, a country where principles, beliefs, and religions have been so intricately interwoven. But can you regard Cubans as a religious people? Castillo, Cuba's top designer, laughs at such questions and is unable to concentrate immediately. "Yes," he says, "of course mine is a religious family. I too believe." My grandmother, he continues, was a famous rumba dancer from the province of Matanzas, where my family originally comes from. In this province, an African ritual culture called Arara is very widespread. It is a very lively, colorful culture with a long history and with traditions passed on from generation to generation. I just close my eyes and I can see those vivid colors and remember that world where I was born. Each section of Havana has its own medicine man. They preserve and even develop many secret pagan African cultures that were brought to Cuba by African slaves. This is Tata Nganga, a medicine man whose ancestors were slaves who were brought here from the Congo. People come to him to find out about their future, rid themselves of illness, to learn the reasons behind their misfortunes. Tatanganga, translated, means father of the vessel. In an ordinary pot, he keeps the head of a dead rat, sacred stones, the remains of birds that have been sacrificed, and a great many other mystical attributes of the netherworld. Only the medicine man can summon the spirits that reside in such a vessel and make them work for him during both white magic seances and black magic rituals. The most important composite of the contents of this vessel that rests on a homemade altar is the soul of a criminal that the medicine man rules. This is a very interesting phenomenon. Black African gods interwoven with Catholic gods. The inclusion of Catholic saints into the pantheon of African gods has led to an amazing creation, which is today called Santeria. Before the ritual begins, the medicine man must get into the spirit's good graces, because summoning spirits is never an easy task. The woman who has come to Tatanganga must pour a certain vodka called Santero, which means medicine man, into a special vessel. The vodka is intended for the as yet imprisoned spirit. Then, the medicine man speaks to the pot for a long time in a mixture of Spanish and Congolese. After the fire ritual, the spirit is ready to materialize for a short period of time in the body of the woman who needs the assistance of the forces of the other world. And then the dance begins. The patient appears to be in a trance, but in reality, she is possessed by the spirit of the mysterious vessel. Judging the behavior of the woman in these few moments of her being possessed, the medicine man determines the roots of her problems and what measures should be taken to solve them. Christian saints gaze upon this exotic ritual with silent approval. On Cuba, they don't mind. In order to get the quite animated spirit out of the body of the living person, the medicine man's assistant literally blows it out of the patient. After this, the spirit returns to the pot to await the next seance. However, not everyone believes in the power of medicine men. One of Cuba's most famous athletes, Xavier Sotomayor, says that he does not believe in Santero. He adds, however, that many of his family members do. One of his grandfathers was a medicine man himself, and this did not stop him from being a devout Catholic. No, Sotomayor does not believe in medicine men, but all of Cuba believes in him and adores him. He is the world record holder in the high jump and is loved in all Spanish-speaking countries of the world. In Spain, a stadium has been named after him. Notice, not on Cuba, in Spain. The chief of Cuba's Comsomol organization, Victoria Velasquez, expresses a very widespread opinion when speaking about the famous athlete who has already become a symbol of an undefeatable Cuba. Sotomayor was born in the poverty-stricken province of Matanzas, she says. The revolution gave him everything and helped him become who he is today. Sotomayor's gold medals are the revolution's gold medals. The highest assessment of a Cuban's achievements, an award presented by Fidel himself. Sotomayor does not consider himself rich. Why? Probably because he's not. Like all Cubans, he loves to dance and be among people who enjoy life as much as he does. He is loved not only by politicians. Every restaurant and club considers it an honor to have him as a guest, and Sotomayor, as a true Cuban, loves good entertainment and, of course, women. This is how a serious historian explains the main character trait of Cubans, a trait that, in his opinion, is almost exclusively Cuban, the ability to experience the joy of living. One of the most joyful European people live in Andalusia, he says, which is the homeland of Christopher Columbus, by the way. On a par with Spaniards in singing, dancing, and playing the drums are Africans, who also found their way to Cuba, albeit against their will, but nevertheless. The origins of Cubans, to a great degree, explain their being gifted musically and their love of dancing. On Cuba, everybody, not just athletes, loves to dance. Such is the alchemy here, designer Castillo explains. Dancing, happiness, love. As a result of mixed marriages between blacks and whites, the mulatto came into being. A synthesis of Africans and Europeans, and not just a biological, but also a cultural synthesis.
No solo una síntesis biológica, sino una síntesis cultural.
It seems that song and dance on Cuba is akin to a storm on the famous Malecon coastal region in Havana. A storm that appears out of nowhere and just as suddenly is over. It is rumored that when the great Sotomayor failed to win any medal at the 1996 Olympic Games in Atlanta, Fidel was very disappointed. The athlete left Havana airport by the service entrance because he had nothing to say to Castro, who was welcoming the athletes who were returning from the USA with victory. But he believes in himself and remembers that all of Cuba is proud of his phenomenal world record, 2 meters 45 centimeters. Sotomayor is certain that in this century, no one will jump higher than he has. Each Saturday, people gather on Salvador Street to dance, drink a little rum, and socialize. They do not dance to impress the tourists, who are few of this part of town. Each dance, that to the uninitiated observer looks like a celebration of the joy of living, is in reality full of ritual and religious meaning, for these are native Cuban dances. People dressed in white are people who have decided to devote themselves to Santeria, become medicine men. Their white clothes mean that they are going through the initiation stage and will soon face the ordainment ritual. They all believe in African gods, the gods of earth, air, sea. Many Cuban and African events coincide. For example, when slavery was abolished in Africa, Cuba followed suit in 1888. And since the majority of slaves on Cuba were from Africa, today, here we find their descendants. Several years ago, Salvador Street was discovered by Americans. The artist was invited to Venice, Venezuela. There, he painted the Hilton Hotel. Later, he painted buildings in Sweden and Norway. However, his priority remains unchanged. It is the creation of an African cultural center in Havana. In order to understand Cubans, one must first understand African culture. One must become a part of these people. This is a country where deep national roots were never forgotten. Regardless of social and political changes, Cubans have never lost sight of their national identity and cultural roots.
Ni por conceptos políticos, o sea, la identidad cultural del cubano es una firme raíz.
When Fidel visited Angola, he was greeted with native dances, and this was very natural for both Africans and Cubans. Today, Fidel, maintaining his faith in socialist ideals, likes to reminisce about his roots. The first books I ever read were religious books, he says. I read the Bible. In my time, it was called the Holy History. I liked these things to such an extent that I think of them quite frequently. Sometimes in my speeches I quote from the Bible. I think that this has influenced my life, allowed me to maintain respect for religion, for all religions. The family of Cuba's leading designer resides in a spacious mansion in the center of Havana. Castillo, in order to avoid climbing stairs each time friends come calling, has devised this simple method for opening the front door. He lives here together with his mother and brother. There was a time, says Castillo, when we lived in a communal flat. After the revolution, we were given this house, and my whole family moved in. I come from a military family. My father was an officer, my mother a cleaning woman. This is the only house in Havana that the Cuban authorities are ready to sell to foreigners. Once, it belonged to a wealthy Brazilian sugar factory owner. This unique building, on a very large plot of land in Havana's most prestigious area, near the Castro residence, is for sale for $2.5 million. The mansion's previous owner went to Africa in 1960 and never returned. Nobody knows what became of him. Some say that he developed an interest in African cults and became a medicine man. In Havana, each street has its own medicine man. Tourists, whose number continues to grow with each passing day, cannot even imagine what goes on in the apartments of average Cubans. In an ordinary apartment, one might notice many unusual things, especially if the apartment belongs to a medicine man. Salvador, the artist, knows all this very well. The majority of these people represent fetish cults, meaning that spirits are kept inside different objects and there they reside from one spiritual seance to the next. Every medicine man has a special room where he keeps the attributes of his religion and his place in it. Here he tells fortunes, asks the spirits permission to perform sacrificial ceremonies. Such ritual ceremonies always draw a crowd of spectators. Neighbors visit their medicine man on prearranged days in order to take part in amazing, one-of-a-kind ceremonies.
Esta influencia indígena de que hablamos anteriormente se sumó una gran influencia.
Modern Cubans are influenced predominantly by Indian culture, then African culture, and the cultures of different European countries. Here, all of these elements have been combined. Costume sacrificial ceremonies are rare on Cuba. Not everyone can afford to stage such an expensive event. In all other respects, the ritual remains the same. Dancers play the roles of African gods. The medicine man ritually sacrifices a chicken. Sacrificial blood is poured over the vessel that contains the spirit. It is then decorated with feathers. The participants, through their dance, communicate with the spirit. The chicken is then eaten by the participants, and afterward, everyone goes home. Stilio, one of Cuba's most famous designers. When they switch off the lights in the club donated by Cuba's Comsomol, he continues his work in his studio on the 22nd floor of the student dormitory. Even if it rained yesterday, rehearsals will take place, puddles notwithstanding. Puddles are not unusual nor surprising, what with broken windows and all, but no one pays attention. Many a girl dreams of becoming a model. Every day, Castillo holds auditions and carefully chooses the girls that conform to his high standards of beauty and elegance. To be a clothing designer on today's Cuba, with constant shortages of fabrics and a great many other things, is very difficult. The head of Cuba's Union of Young Communists believes that Castillo, in his work, has shown a maximum of creative initiative. He is a genuine talent, and the Komsomol approves and supports him. The designer himself says that his ideas are predominantly influenced by African culture. This is apparent in the colors he uses and also in the music he chooses for his shows. Many of the ideas that find their way into his collections are influenced by what he sees on the street. Castillo was the first designer who used the colors of Cuba's national flag in his creations. He claims that this is a new trend in fashion and that it is even supported by several high-placed government officials. The current foreign minister, who used to be the first secretary of the Union of Young Communists, was instrumental in overcoming the mystical attitude toward patriotic symbols. Why not use in clothing what people like the most? The current leader of Cuba's Komsomol does not wear Castillo's creations, although she does approve of the patriotic theme in his work. It's just that she prefers a more sport-oriented style. Castillo laughs. He has his own standards for women. Patriotism is as much a Cuban trait as is their natural joy of living. The historian Jimenez calls Cubans fighters. History has taught them to be. Exactly this fact can explain that during the 37 years that Cubans have been living in the state of revolution, no one has succeeded in bringing them to their knees. The most powerful governments of the world have tried and failed. Boxing is one of the most popular sports on Cuba, but during international competitions, it becomes much more than a simple sporting event. The Cuban boxer must always win. The athletes understand this. As a rule, his opponent understands this also, and it is his dream to be victorious in his fight with a Cuban boxer. World-famous star athletes such as Felix Savon, Teofilo Stevenson, and Xavier Sotomayor rise proudly to their feet at the first strains of the Cuban national anthem. Though far removed from sports, Castillo considers himself #1 on Cuba, and his goal is worldwide recognition and acceptance also. Meanwhile, though, Castillo holds his fashion shows in provincial, so-called houses of culture that are poorly suited for such events. However, he is certain that someday he and his creations will conquer other countries too. But even today, Castillo resembles, more than anything else, a successful, confident businessman. Several years ago, Cuban models first started taking part in international fashion shows. Today, many of them have earned international acclaim and have signed lucrative contracts. Castillo is certain. One fine day, his time will come.
Ron con Coca-Cola.
Otro poquito, ron. Ron, Mauricio. Dame ron.
Havana's nightlife is noisy and diverse. Cubans gather in houses of culture and discotheques, but by no means only there. At night, under a full moon, a sacred tree is the gathering place for the followers of ancient ritual cults brought to Cuba by African slaves and preserved by their descendants through many centuries. This is the night when the feeding rituals of spirits and sacred stones are performed. The stones are carefully kept in sacred vessels by medicine men, rulers of occult forces, doctors, and helpers to a great many people who have faith in their powers. The uninitiated can participate in this mystical ritual only after his body and soul are protected. Special Kabbalistic symbols are drawn on the participant's head, hands, and feet. These symbols have gone unchanged for over 500 years, the 500 years that the first African slaves and their children have lived on the islands of the Caribbean. The heads of the participants are fanned by the wings of the birds that will later be sacrificed to the same spirits that they are now being protected from. Foreigners are enveloped by cigar smoke and sprinkled with Cuban rum by the medicine man's assistants. With these precautions taken, the spirits will not hurt the participants of the ceremony. Victoria Velasquez believes that the Comsomol organization should not ignore the section of Cuban youth that is interested in African cultures. Yes, she says, there are young people on Cuba who are drawn by Afro-Cuban rituals. They are interested in them and they participate in them. I do not believe that they represent the majority of Cuban youth. More likely they are in the minority, she adds. The first work of research about Cuban African medicine men was published in Spain in 1917. The book caused quite a scandal among Havana's high society. The Afro-Cuban pantheon consists of 19 saints. Spirits are embodied in stones, stones that can move, speak to those who understand their language, and even have offspring. The place where the ritual is to be performed must be protected from the interference of outside forces by fire. In order to possess holy power, the stones must go through an initiation ceremony. Medicine men wash the stones with a potion from sacred herbs and the blood of sacrificial animals and birds, roosters, goats, or lambs. The feeding of sacred stones is one of the most mystical ceremonies that takes place several times a year by the light of a full moon. It can continue for up to 3 days. The medicine men and their assistants begin by sacrificing birds. Before sacrificing the ritual rooster, the medicine man must tear out its tongue, but only with his teeth. On Cuba, according to the artist Salvador, 3 religions have very strong roots. They are Yoruba, Congo, and Abakwa, all from different regions of Africa and, until recently, were held secret. The blood of the sacrificial animal whose neck has been anointed with rum is used to draw a cross on the sacred tree. Meanwhile, the dances of the participants to the beat of the sacred drums continues. The uninitiated can also take part in the dancing, but only after a special protection ceremony is performed. The main sacrificial animal is either a goat or a lamb, but it has to be black. The blood of these animals, that are decorated with mystical painted symbols, is intended for feeding sacred stones in which spirits reside. The medicine men and their assistants also have a right to this blood. Meanwhile, more and more people take part in the dancing after the obligatory rum and cigar ceremony. At the base of the sacred tree, a hole is dug. Into this hole, a vessel with a chain around it is placed. A vessel that the medicine man brings with him from his home, a vessel where spirits reside. These are the spirits that are ruled by the medicine men, the main participants in these rituals. Any Cuban will gladly explain what exactly he is doing here. The innards of the goat and rooster are then buried at the foot of the sacred tree. All of this is intended for the spirits. The meat of the animals is later consumed by the participants in the ritual, and thus everyone is fed, people and spirits. This religion is like a subterranean river that has flowed, flows, and will flow always. And although there were times when there was nothing on the surface, nothing religious at all, yet deep under the surface, all of this existed and was carefully preserved, always. One of the things that sets Salvador apart from the average people on the street is the theatrical shows he stages, and has recently started demonstrating to foreigners. He believes that his art has a great future, and not only on Cuba. Salvador the artist says that today, when many people live in the past, one-sided socialism, primitive materialism, national culture possessed of deep historical roots is getting a new start, and this time it will be for ages to come, he is certain. It seems that not only artists feel this way. Nuno Jimenez, Castro's biographer, says that the roots of the Cuban nation can to a great extent explain what is happening with Cuba today. All this is the product of history. This is by no means accidental. This is a historically proven process, says Cuba's official historian and Fidel's personal friend. Each country has its own unique political system that is influenced by its historical roots. Our system is in harmony with the nation's culture and history, and is a composite of a great many elements, including socialism.